The portkey dropped him in a field. Harry staggered, caught himself with one hand in the long grass, and looked up at what was waiting. He'd expected a sign, maybe a gate, Charlie Weasley standing somewhere visible, waving. Something that would indicate arrival at a place that had been arranged through proper channels, with letters and owls and Arthur Weasley's ministry contacts. He hadn't expected the size of it. The sanctuary spread across the hillside like something that had been there before the hillside existed. Beyond a low stone wall running left and right further than he could see, the land dropped away into a wide valley where the trees were sparse and blackened at their crowns, scorched to strange shapes by years of proximity to things that breathed fire. There was a smell in the air he couldn't name, and then could, sulfur and something, older than sulfur, animal and mineral and hot. From somewhere below the ridge came a sound between a roar and a wind, low and resonant, going straight past his ears and settling in his sternum. You made it. Charlie Weasley was coming toward him from the wall carrying 2 mugs of tea. He was stockier than Bill and shorter, with the doubled Weasley freckles of someone who'd spent years outdoors, and red hair long enough to brush his collar in a way that would have made his mother's eye twitch. There were burn scars on the backs of his hands and along his jaw. He moved, like someone used to things being unpredictable, with an unhurried ease that made the enormous valley behind him seem somehow reasonable. He held out one of the mugs. "It's a long portkey from Surrey. Drink it." Harry drank it. It was very strong and very sweet, and nothing like what he got at the Dursleys. He looked out at the valley, and after a moment Charlie came to stand beside him and looked out at it too. "That sound," Harry said. "Romanian longhorn. She's been restless today." Charlie said it the way someone might describe weather. "Come on, I'll show you around before the afternoon feeding." The next 2 days had a particular texture. The smell of sulfur and damp earth. The light falling differently here than it did in Scotland. The sound of dragons at a distance, and the profound silence that fell when you were close to them, and they were watching you. Charlie walked him through the sanctuary with the ease of someone navigating his own house, pointing out which areas were safe for visitors and which weren't, explaining things in shorthand that was half technical and half personal. The Hungarian horntail in the eastern pen had a clutch of eggs she was protective of. "So you came at her from the north approach. The young longhorn male near the creek hadn't yet learned to regulate his flame, so you wore the full leather kit within 30 meters. Harry listened. He asked questions when he had them, which was often. He'd never thought much about dragons as creatures rather than obstacles. The Norbert situation in first year had been entirely about concealment, about getting the dragon out before Hagrid was caught, not about the dragon itself, and it was strange to see them here, moving in their own landscape, enormous and unhurried. "They're not what I thought," he said, at the end of the second day. "What did you think? More chaotic? Always attacking?" He tried to find the word. Like something in a cage. The horntail's not always attacking. She's always vigilant. Charlie looked out at the eastern pen, where the horntail was a shape in the lowering light, her tail moving in slow arcs. "There's a difference." His birthday came quietly on the 31st. He hadn't mentioned it. It wasn't the kind of thing he mentioned, but Charlie had been writing home, and the dragon keepers produced a slightly scorched cake at dinner, and sang happy birthday, in ways that were enthusiastic and entirely out of tune. Harry sat at the end of the long wooden table with these strangers, who were Charlie's colleagues, and felt something in his chest loosen by 1 degree. He was 13. Then, at some point past midnight, he was 14. The morning he was meant to leave was bright and clear. He packed his bag, said his goodbyes, checked his watch twice for the portkey window, and walked out of the guest quarters into the morning light. The dragons were there, not 1, not 2. A cluster of them, the Romanian longhorn he'd spent the most time watching, and two others he recognized from the western pen, and at the edge of the group the horntail from the eastern enclosure, which meant she'd moved a significant distance from her nesting site. They weren't making noise, they weren't moving. They were simply positioned in front of the gate in a shape that Harry's eyes kept trying to read as accidental, and his instincts kept insisting was not. He stopped. The longhorn looked at him with the specific quality of attention Harry associated with moments he'd rather not be having. He took a step toward the gate. None of the dragons moved, but something else did. The air near the outer boundary seemed to thicken, briefly, and when he took another step forward, he felt it physically. A resistance, like pressing his hand against a window from the wrong side. Not painful, not violent, simply present. He stepped back. The resistance vanished. He stood there for a moment. Then he did something that would have been reasonable if these had been snakes. He opened his mouth and let the language come. "What are you doing?" The parcel tongue fell off the dragons like water. They did not move, did not react, did not acknowledge it in any way. Harry closed his mouth and stood in the bright morning air and understood that this was not a situation a snake language was going to solve. Charlie was coming from the direction of the enclosures, moving with his attention fully on Harry and the gate, reading the shape of the scene from a distance. His expression shifted twice in quick succession. First recognition that something was wrong, then a professional assessment of what kind of wrong. He came to stand beside Harry and looked at the dragons, at the gate, at Harry's face. "I can't get through," Harry said. Charlie put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled, sharp and clear. 2 keepers appeared from across the yard within 30 seconds. He spoke to them in low, rapid Romanian, and they looked at the formation of dragons, and then at Harry, and then at each other. The sanctuary's senior keeper arrived last, a weathered man who had been working with dragons for decades. He walked the perimeter of the formation slowly, studying the spacing between the animals, the precise angle of their bodies. He said something to Charlie that Harry couldn't follow. "What did he say?" Harry asked. Charlie was quiet a beat too long. "He says he's seen it in the records. The way they're standing, the formation." He paused. "He's never seen it in person." "What is it?" Charlie looked at him, and then back at the dragons. "He's calling it a warding circle." Harry's portkey window opened and closed while they were standing there. He didn't feel it happen, but he knew afterward from the specific absence where a pull should have been. He stood in the Romanian morning air and did not go home. That evening, Charlie sent 2 owls. One went south and west, toward a house in an orchard in Devon, where a family was waiting for news of someone's safe return. The other went north, to Scotland, to a school that was empty of students, addressed to the man who ran it, and marked urgent. The owl arrived at Hogwarts before dawn. Dumbledore had been awake already. He often was, in the summer when the castle was empty and the nights carried a different quality than they did when children filled it. He was in his study when the owl arrived, and he read Charlie Weasley's letter at the window with the first grey light coming off the mountains, and he read it twice. He stood very still for a moment after the second reading. Then he set the letter down on his desk with the precise care of a man choosing not to make a gesture, and went to the cabinet where he kept his writing materials. He wrote 2 letters. The first went to the office of the Romanian Wizarding Authority. It was formal in the way that only a document bearing an institutional seal could be formal, every courtesy in its correct position. And underneath all of it, a very clear statement. Harry James Potter was enrolled at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry as a registered student under Dumbledore's care, and his return was required at the earliest possible arrangement. The second went to Charlie Weasley at the sanctuary. It was briefer. At its close it bore the Headmaster's seal, a circle of deep blue wax impressed with the Hogwarts crest which carried, in formal wizarding protocol, the force of a legal summons from the head of a registered institution of magical education. Dumbledore had used it perhaps 4 times in his life as headmaster. It was not a thing he deployed without weight. He sent both owls before the sun had cleared the mountains. Then he stood at his window for a little while and permitted himself briefly the thing he did not allow in correspondence: a very quiet, very precise alarm. The headmaster's seal arrived at the sanctuary the following morning. Harry was in the yard when Charlie found him, sitting on a low stone wall, watching the enclosures with a mug of tea that had gone cold without his noticing. "Post," Charlie said. He held out an official-looking envelope bearing the Hogwarts seal, then indicated a second letter, this one in more formal script, tucked under his arm. "That one's addressed to the sanctuary's administration. I think you should read yours first." Harry read it. It said, in formal language that was unmistakably Dumbledore's, despite the institutional weight of it, that Harry was required to return to Hogwarts under the authority of the headmaster's seal, and that arrangements had been initiated with the Romanian Wizarding Authority, and that Charlie was instructed to cooperate with said arrangements. "What does the other one say?" Harry asked. "Roughly the same, addressed to the people who run the sanctuary." Charlie folded his own copy. "I've already spoken to the administrator." She read Dumbledore's letter, gave it every proper courtesy. But the sanctuary's governing framework takes precedence while the warding circle is active. The seal has no mechanism to physically move someone if the sanctuary's own magical structure is already preventing it. Charlie said it carefully, like he'd spent some time finding the phrasing. She wasn't dismissive. She just couldn't do anything. Harry looked down at the letter in his hands. The headmaster's seal sat at the bottom of it, deep blue and very official and entirely useless. "Dumbledore sent his seal," Harry said. "It's a British authority. The sanctuary operates under Romanian wizarding jurisdiction." Charlie sat on the wall beside him. "His authority doesn't stop being real. It just stops at the border, the way a British official couldn't compel something happening in another country." Harry turned this over. He had spent his birthday and the day after it, assuming that once Charlie's owl reached Dumbledore, the situation would arrange itself, that someone would know the right word, the right form to file, the right thing to do. He had not, until this moment, properly asked himself what happened if they didn't. "He can't just get me out," Harry said. "Not while the warding circle is holding," Charlie said. "No." Harry nodded once. He folded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket and did not take it out again that day. The owl from the burrow arrived that afternoon. Charlie was near the post when it came in from the west. Harry noticed in the careful way he'd been noticing things lately that this was not accidental. Charlie had been close to the owl post all morning. He took the letter before Harry had moved from where he was sitting and walked toward the administration building without comment, the envelope already going into his jacket pocket. Harry watched him go and did not follow. Some things a person didn't need to be told about. The set of Charlie's shoulders said enough about what was in that letter and who it was for and who had written it. That evening, Charlie and the senior keeper spent several hours in the administration building's records room. It was a low-ceilinged space with shelves of leather-bound volumes going back to the reservation's founding, and it smelled of old leather and something faintly mineral. The lamplight in there was the particular gold of working late. The founding records were in Harvey Ridgebit's hand, the longhorn dragon keeper who had established this place, dead for more than 20 years now. But his cramped and thorough handwriting was everywhere in these shelves, meticulous about things that had happened decades before Harry was born. Harry sat on the step outside and waited. Charlie came out sometime past 9. He sat beside Harry on the step without saying anything at first, and for a moment there was only the sound of the valley below, the night shift of the keepers doing their rounds, the occasional low resonance from one of the enclosures. "We found something," Charlie said. "One reference. A note in the founding records older than Ridgebit's entries, written in the margins, a dragonkin bond invoked at a different sanctuary sometime in the 1950s. An unnamed wizard." He paused. "The note doesn't say how it resolved. So there's precedent," Harry said of a kind. Harry looked up at the sky. The Romanian dark was a different shade than Surrey or Scotland, broader, with more stars than he had ever seen from his bedroom window. From the valley came a low sound from one of the dragons, and it went straight past his ears and settled in his chest the way it always did now. "The World Cup is in 2 weeks," Harry said. It came out flat, not quite a complaint, just a fact he was sitting with. "I know," Charlie said. Neither of them spoke. After that, Harry stood up, eventually, left the mug on the step, and went inside to the guest quarters. He lay down on the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling. He was not in any discomfort. The sanctuary was plain but not unkind, and the dragons had not threatened him, only contained him, which was its own particular kind of unreasonable. He was simply tired, and Dumbledore had sent the Headmaster's seal, and it had not worked, and somewhere west of here a family was getting ready for the biggest Quidditch event in years, and he was not going to be there, and there was nothing to be done about any of it tonight. He was still awake when the Romanian Longhorn called again from the valley, low and steady, and entirely unbothered by the rest of it. Harry stared at the ceiling for a long time. Eventually, he slept. It arrived at the sanctuary in the early morning, while Harry was at the edge of the enclosures, watching the Hungarian horntail move through her nesting routine, with the methodical focus she applied to everything. The owl, one Harry recognized as Percy's Hermes, borrowed without ceremony, the way Ron borrowed everything that wasn't nailed down, dropped the letter in Harry's general direction and immediately helped itself to the water trough intended for the keeper's birds. Harry read it, standing where he was. It began. Ron's letters always began this way, with the largest possible complaint, rendered in the smallest possible handwriting, as if writing more tightly would make the information less outrageous. "I cannot believe you didn't tell me you were going to Romania. I cannot believe you went to Romania. I cannot believe you are currently being hated in Romania by dragons. Mom doesn't believe it either. Dad sort of believes it, but he's trying to look calm about it, which means he believes it entirely." Ginny said, "It sounds brilliant," which I think is the wrong response. Then, after a gap that Harry suspected was Ron physically setting down the quill and picking it back up, "Tell me everything. I want to know exactly what the warding circle looks like. What kind of dragons, whether they breathe fire at you or just stand there, whether you've talked to them. Can you do that parcel tongue thing with dragons?" Harry had already tried the parcel tongue. He'd known the answer to that one before. Ron had thought to ask it. The second page was more questions, smaller handwriting. At the very bottom, wedged into the margin in a different ink that suggested it had been added after the letter was already folded, "Dad says if they can't get you out, he'll come there himself." Harry read it twice, and something in his chest loosened by a degree or two. Hermione's owl arrived 20 minutes later. It had the bearing of an owl that had been given a precise set of instructions and intended to follow them. It waited while Harry retrieved the envelope, waited while he unfastened the attached pages, then settled on the wall beside him with the expression of something conserving energy for a return journey. There were 4 pages. The letter itself was 2 pages in Hermione's close, neat handwriting. Behind it were 2 more pages of notes in a different hand. Library references, margin annotations, the kind of documentation that suggested someone had been taking notes on notes since Tuesday. Hermione's letter said, "I've been at the Hogwarts Library since Tuesday." The term dragonkin lore does not appear in A History of Magic, nor in Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, nor in Adelbert Waffling's Magical Theory, nor in any of the standard British wizarding legal reference texts I've found access to. The closest reference I've located is a single footnote in an old survey of interspecies wizarding protocols, published in the years after the Warlocks Convention, which mentions an unnamed dragon bond tradition in Central European dragon-keeping communities, but the footnote author describes it as likely a regional custom of uncertain provenance. I'm not certain whether dragonkin lore is a genuine ancient protocol simply not documented in British sources, a mistranslation of Romanian wizarding custom, or something else entirely. I'm going back today. I've attached everything I have so far. Harry read it twice, then folded all 4 pages and put them in his jacket pocket alongside the headmaster's seal letter. The pocket was getting crowded. The ministry representative arrived mid-morning. He was a small, neat man in robes that were slightly too formal for the Romanian summer, carrying a leather satchel with the ministry crest on the clasp. Charlie met him at the gate and walked him through the sanctuary's administrative formalities with the particular courtesy of someone who was being very careful not to be impolite. The representative spent 40 minutes in conversation with the senior keeper and the sanctuary's administrator, during which he produced several documents from the satchel, reviewed them with both parties in turn, and then replaced them in precisely the same order he'd removed them. He found Harry afterward in the yard and was perfectly polite. He represented the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures Beast Division. The ministry had formally initiated inquiries through appropriate diplomatic channels. He said this last sentence with the tone of a man who had rehearsed it on the portkey over. "Can you get me out?" Harry asked to pause. "I'm not in a position to compel the Romanian administration," the representative said. Harry nodded. He'd expected that. After the representative left his satchel, exactly as full as it had arrived, nothing resolved, Charlie arranged for the senior keeper to sit down with Harry properly. They gathered in the records room that evening, the 4 of them. Harry, Charlie, the senior keeper, the lamplight. The senior keeper had the founding records open to the margin note they'd found 2 evenings ago, but he didn't consult it often. He spoke from something that ran deeper than written record, decades of working with creatures who did not operate on human terms. Dragons have been classified XXXXX by the British Ministry, the senior keeper said in careful accented English. Impossible to train, impossible to domesticate. This is accurate as far as it describes what dragons will not do. It says nothing about what dragons choose to do. He let that sit for a moment before continuing. In rare cases, historically rare, perhaps once in a generation, a dragon community will identify a specific wizard as what our oldest records call kinbound. Not a trained wizard, not a tamed wizard. A wizard whose magical presence reads to the dragons as something they already recognize. He looked at Harry steadily. The bond that results is older than the Warlocks Convention of 1709. The convention concerns breeding restrictions. It has nothing to say about kin bonds, because kin bonds are not about what wizards do with dragons. They are about what dragons choose to do with wizards. The International Confederation of Wizards, Charlie said. has a founding charter that predates the convention by several centuries. One of its oldest provisions recognizes interspecies protocols invoked by non-human magical communities. That provision is why Dumbledore's seal didn't work. The seal is British domestic authority, the charter is older and wider, and the bond itself, Harry said. Has it ever been broken? The senior keeper was quiet for a moment. Not by force. There is no case in the records where external pressure resolved a kin bond. It ends from within, when the bond is acknowledged voluntarily and terms are agreed between the parties. How long does that take? There is no formula, the senior keeper said. Harry looked at his hands. Why me? He said. I'm 14. I've never been to Romania before. I've never done anything with dragons. I helped get a dragon egg out of a friend's hut in first year, and that's it. Why would they choose me? The senior keeper considered him without hurry, in the way Harry had come to associate with people who spent their lives alongside creatures that moved on a different time scale than humans did. I do not know, he said. The records offer no formula for why the bond is triggered in a specific case. The dragons chose you. I cannot tell you the reason. Harry looked at the table. Not at the records, not at Charlie, not at the senior keeper, just at the grain of the wood. He had not been afraid of the dragons. He'd established that much, over 5 days now. The thing he was afraid of, he only recognized now in the specific silence that followed, I do not know, was the possibility that no formula existed, that the right answer was not waiting somewhere to be found by the right person with the right access to the right library, that the situation might simply be permanent in a way that no letter and no ministry representative and no headmaster's seal could touch. That was a different kind of afraid. The second owl from Dumbledore arrived while they were still in the records room. It was a large bird, not one Harry recognized, and it swept over the yard without pausing at the owl post, banked once above the administration building, and delivered its letter directly to the sanctuary's administrator. Charlie was at the window when it came in, and went still in the way he went, still when he was reading the behavior of something he needed to understand before he reacted to it. The envelope was addressed to the Romanian Wizarding Authority. Below the Hogwarts crest on the seal, there was a second line of text that had not appeared on any of Dumbledore's previous letters. Harry crossed the room to the window and read it from across the yard. Supreme Mugwump, International Confederation of Wizards. The administrator took the letter inside. The door closed. Harry stood at the window and looked at the building for a moment, and then looked away and did not find out what the letter said that night. The Romanian Wizarding Authority's formal reply came to Dumbledore rather than to Charlie, which Harry learned about through Charlie's summary of what the sanctuary's administrator had read him in the records room that afternoon. The short version, Charlie said, setting down his mug. The Romanian authority acknowledged the Dragonkin bond as a legitimate invocation of ancient interspecies protocol under the provision of the ICW's founding charter that predated the Warlocks Convention. They were prepared to convene a formal review of the situation. The review process, once convened, would take some weeks. Possibly longer. Harry would remain at the sanctuary pending the outcome. So we're waiting, Harry said. We're waiting, Charlie confirmed. And while we wait, the review is being convened. And while the review is being convened, we're also waiting. That is, Charlie said, with the even honesty of a man who had been working in bureaucratic proximity to the ICW long enough not to be surprised by it. Essentially correct. Harry looked out at the valley. He had been in Romania for 8 days. The directive from the British Ministry of Magic arrived 2 days later, addressed not to the sanctuary, but directly to the Romanian Wizarding Authority. The ministry representative, who had remained stationed at the sanctuary, informed Charlie about it with the particular neutrality of someone conveying news he personally found awkward to deliver. The Minister for Magic himself had signed it. It demanded Harry's return as a British national and a minor under British wizarding jurisdiction, and it cited his age, his enrollment at Hogwarts, and 3 separate articles of British wizarding law. The Romanian authorities' response came back the following morning. It acknowledged the directive with full formal courtesy, and then noted that the Dragon Kin Bond, as a protocol of the ICW's founding charter, predated the jurisdictional framework under which the ministry was operating. The bond's claim on the sanctuary's territory and on Harry's presence within it had been established under the charter's interspecies provisions, which held precedence over subsequent ministry authority. The directive was not dismissed, it was deferred, pending the ICW review under the precedents established by the charter itself. The representative found Charlie and Harry in the yard that afternoon, and was quiet for a moment before he spoke, with the air of a man deciding something. "Between ourselves," he said, looking primarily at Charlie, "the minister is not primarily concerned with Mr. Potter's welfare." Charlie looked at him steadily. Harry did too. "He's concerned," the representative said, choosing each word with care, "with the political dimensions of the situation, a British minor being held by dragons on foreign soil. If the story reaches the press, it becomes a matter of Wizengamot questions, of public attention, of the ministry being seen to have lost control of a situation." He stopped, smoothed the front of his robes. "The minister would prefer a quiet resolution, any resolution." "So would Harry," Charlie said. "Yes," the representative said, with something that might have been genuine regret. "I imagine he would, with nowhere to go and nothing to fix." Harry started spending actual time in the sanctuary. Not near the gate. He had stopped going near the gate, because standing at a magical boundary he couldn't cross served no purpose, but in the feeding grounds and nesting areas that Charlie had shown him in the first 2 days, before any of this started. Charlie walked with him for the first hour of each morning and then left him to move on his own terms, close enough to intervene if something went wrong, far enough away not to make Harry feel observed. The Hungarian horntail was the breed most aggressive toward strangers. Harry had been told this, and he believed it, and one morning he walked toward her. Anyway, not fast, not slow, using the unhurried pace he'd seen Charlie use. No sudden movement, no display, just the fact of being present and non-threatening. She turned her full attention on him when he was about 20 meters away. It was not like being looked at by an animal in any ordinary sense. The weight of it was immense and specific, like being measured by something that had no obligation to arrive at a human conclusion. Harry kept moving, carefully, until he was perhaps 15 meters away, and then stopped. He looked back. After a long moment, 30 seconds, perhaps longer, she looked away. Not in flight, not in threat display. She turned back to what she had been doing with the complete, unhurried attention of a predator that did not classify the thing in front of it as prey. Harry stood in the nesting ground and breathed. He wasn't sure whether being comprehensively ignored by a Hungarian horntail was better or worse than being attacked. He thought, on balance, it might simply be stranger. Charlie found him sitting on the boundary wall of the nesting grounds after dinner that evening, watching the light leave the valley. He came with 2 mugs without asking, sat down beside Harry, and was quiet for a while. "Oliver Wood used to talk about you," Harry said eventually. "At Hogwarts he said you could have played for England. Charlie laughed, a quick, genuine sound. Wood said that to everyone who didn't go professional. He was deeply committed to the idea that unused Quidditch talent was a personal insult to the sport. Could you have? Charlie considered it with the straightforwardness he applied to most things. Maybe. I was a decent seeker. I was fast. The scouts from the Kenmare Kestrels came to watch our last match in 7th year. He looked out at the valley where a Romanian longhorn was moving slowly along the far tree line. But I'd already been out here the summer after 6th year. The program takes visiting students 6 weeks. I'd come to help with a wing injury case and ended up learning more in those 6 weeks than I'd learned in 6 years of care of magical creatures. He paused. People tend to say, I gave up Quidditch for dragons. That's not quite right. Quidditch was something I was good at. This is something I chose. Those are different things. Harry was quiet for a moment. He knew the difference between them, or he thought he did, in a way he hadn't had words for before. Being good at something had never felt like a choice. Survival wasn't a choice. Parseltongue wasn't a choice. Do you miss it? He asked. Sometimes, Charlie said. Not the part people think. I don't miss what my career would have been. The travel, the press, the performance aspect of it. I miss playing. We do pick up matches with the other keepers in the lower field on Sunday mornings, which helps. He shrugged. I don't feel like I'm missing a life I should have had. Why, I feel like I'm exactly where I chose to be, which is a thing most people don't get. The valley had settled into its evening sounds, the particular calls and wing beats from the enclosures, the distant firecrack as something tested its breath in the dark. Harry had stopped noticing the sulphur smell, which Charlie had told him happened after about 4 days. He supposed that was true. Ron's second letter arrived the following morning. It was longer than the first, which Harry hadn't imagined was possible. The first 3 pages were a detailed account of everything Ron now knew about the situation, with annotations sourced from Hermione, who had apparently been corresponding with Ron separately and more informatively. Then there was an entire page about the Quidditch World Cup, the Bulgarian national team, the Irish formation strategy, the specific seat numbers of the Weasley family's tickets, the comprehensive unfairness of Harry being in Romania for any of this. Harry could tell the difference between Ron performing outrage for effect and Ron genuinely upset, and this was the latter. The last page was brief. It said, I know it's not your fault. I know you're not there because you want to be. I just wanted you to know that. Come back soon. It was the most direct thing Ron had written in a letter, without hiding it inside a joke, which meant he'd been staring at the page for a while before he sent it. Harry folded the letter and put it in his pocket with the others, which were accumulating, and went to sit in the nesting grounds. The horntail had her eggs arranged beneath her and was making small adjustments to their positioning with a focus Harry recognized as the kind that left no attention over for anything else. He sat at a reasonable distance and watched her work, and did not think about Quidditch tickets or ICW reviews or the particular shape of the problem he was in. And for perhaps half an hour, the only thing that required his attention was the nesting dragon in front of him, who remained comprehensively indifferent. He was starting to understand exactly the right kind of company. Arthur Weasley arrived on the morning of the 11th day. Harry knew it was Arthur before he saw him clearly. The height was unmistakable, and the way he moved through the sanctuary's entrance yard, looking at everything with an attention that was slightly sideways to the reason he was there, was distinctly that of a man who could not quite stop noticing the world around him, even when the world around him was not the point. He paused at the entrance gate to examine the locking mechanism. He paused again at the corner of the administration building to look at the weather vane on its roof. Harry heard him say something to Charlie in a low, wondering voice, about the design of the dragon transport crates stacked in the far corner of the yard, and Charlie said something back, with the quiet patience of someone who had grown up with this and loved it without quite being able to explain it. Then Arthur saw Harry, and the attention he'd been giving to everything else contracted into something much more focused, and he crossed the yard quickly. He hugged Harry the way Molly hugged people, with his whole self, without reservation, and his hands gripped Harry's shoulders for a moment before he let go. "Your hair is longer," Arthur said. "I've been here 11 days, Harry said. Yes, Arthur looked at him in that particular way he had, that measured and warm and unhurried way that made you feel like whatever you'd said was being taken seriously. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. The dragons haven't. They're not threatening me. They're just—" Harry stopped. "I'm fine. I'm just here." Arthur nodded once, slowly. The kind of nod that meant he intended to process the full weight of that, somewhere private at a later time, without making Harry watch him do it. Charlie steered them toward the kitchen, because Charlie steered most things toward the kitchen, and they had tea, and Arthur asked careful questions about the sanctuary's layout, the specific mechanics of the warding circle, and Harry answered as clearly as he could. Arthur listened with the precise, unhurried attention he gave to things he genuinely needed to understand. He didn't ask anything twice. He didn't perform concern. He just listened and nodded, and occasionally looked out the window at the enclosures in the middle distance, with an expression Harry couldn't entirely read. After a while, Arthur said he wanted to speak with Charlie privately, and Harry took his tea outside and sat on the step and watched the keepers run the mid-morning feeding, and tried not to think too hard about what they were saying. He thought he could probably guess most of it. Charlie came to find him after perhaps 20 minutes. He didn't report the conversation, and Harry didn't ask. But something in Charlie's manner had settled slightly. A quality of decision, as if something that had been held open was now resolved. The boundary test had been Charlie's idea, proposed over lunch. "I want to try something." "We know the containment responds to you at the boundary. The warding circle forms when you approach. The magical barrier pushes back when you press it. But every time you've tried it, you've been alone. I want to see what happens if you're not." "You think having someone with me changes it?" Harry said. "I think we don't know," Charlie said, "and we should." Arthur was already outside the gate when Harry and Charlie came through the yard, standing on the road just past the boundary, having positioned himself there with the deliberate calm of a man who had decided in advance how he intended to behave in this situation. He raised a hand when he saw them coming. When Harry and Charlie were 30 meters from the gate, the warding circle formed. It moved the way it always moved, with a lack of hurry that should have been less unnerving than aggression, but somehow wasn't. The Romanian longhorn to the center. The horntail and the others taking up their positions, in the specific spacing the senior keeper had identified in the founding records, each dragon settling into place with the total attention and total stillness of creatures who had done this before and intended to do it correctly. They made no sound. They did not threaten. They simply established themselves between Harry and the gate, and the air in front of them had the quality it always had when they gathered, dense with something that wasn't magic in any way Harry could name, but was not nothing either. Charlie walked toward the gate. The circle let him pass between two of the outer dragons without any response at all, the way they always responded to Charlie, which was to say they acknowledged him and made space for him because he was part of the place. Harry followed. He felt the boundary before he reached it, the thickening in the air, the specific texture of something that was about to push back. He kept walking. When he reached the point where the resistance lived, it was there, the same as always, measured, precise, exactly as strong as the force he applied to it. He pressed. It pressed back. He stopped. Charlie was on the road outside. He had turned back to face Harry. Arthur was 3 meters further on. He had moved closer without Harry noticing, as close to the gate as the road allowed. His arms were at his sides. He had the expression of a man who was holding himself very still on purpose. Harry stood at the invisible line and looked at him. He had spent 4 years managing a specific and familiar absence. The knowledge that the family he wanted was not the family he had, that there was a shape of missing he carried around without making noise about it. He'd been effective at routing around it. Hogwarts helped. Ron and Hermione helped. The sense that he was in motion, going somewhere, building something, that helped. There was a kind of keeping busy that worked well enough that he mostly didn't notice what it was covering. Standing at a gate in Romania with Arthur Weasley 3 meters away and no way to close the distance, with the invisible boundary exactly as solid as a wall and twice as wrong, Harry found that keeping busy had run out. He stood there and looked at Arthur, and Arthur looked back at him, and neither of them said anything, and the dragons held their positions without moving, and after a while Harry took 2 steps back and the resistance eased, and there was air again where the pressure had been. "All right," he said. It came out steadier than he'd expected. Arthur's voice came from the road, quiet. "Harry, just that. Just his name. It was not nothing." That evening, Charlie went to the administration building to work through the following week's schedule with the senior keeper, and Arthur turned in early. He had been awake well before dawn to make his portkey window, and there was a particular kind of tired on his face that was more than just travel. Harry sat with him until Arthur's eyes closed, then left the guest quarters quietly, and walked to the nesting grounds without quite deciding to. The chief Romanian longhorn was already there. It wasn't doing anything, as far as Harry could tell, not feeding, not sleeping, not engaged in the maintenance behaviors the younger dragons performed in the evenings. It was simply present in the dense, deliberate way the dragons were present in the warding circle, aware of everything in the near vicinity and apparently in no hurry about any of it. Harry sat down on a low outcrop of rock and looked at it. He didn't try Parseltongue. He knew from the first morning that it wouldn't work. The words had slid off the dragons without catching, without registering, like speaking into a space where that particular sound didn't exist. He had no language they shared. He had nothing, in fact, except his own presence, in the dark beside a Romanian longhorn who had been watching him since he arrived and had not yet explained why. The longhorn looked back at him for a long time. Then it lowered its head, not to the ground, not down in any way that suggested distress or submission, just slightly, a few degrees in Harry's direction, the way someone might nod at a person they'd seen before and intended to go on seeing. Then it turned away and went back to whatever it had been occupied with before Harry arrived. Harry stayed on the rock for a little while longer. Then he went inside, found the spare parchment in the kitchen, and wrote to Hermione. The letter was brief. It said, "I have a question. In every historical case, you found where a dragon warding circle was invoked, every record, every footnote, every passing reference, no matter how vague, what was the wizard inside it known for? Not what happened to them afterward, just what they were. Write back when you can." He didn't know why he was asking. He sealed the letter, left it with the outgoing post, and went to bed and lay looking at the ceiling for a long time before he slept. Hermione arrived on a Tuesday with Arthur. Arthur had gone back to the Burrow for 3 days, to see Molly, to be present in person, for whatever needed presence, rather than owl. He came back through the sanctuary's entrance gate with Hermione, a step behind him, carrying a bag that looked like it held several times its visible weight in paper. She crossed the yard to Harry and hugged him, which she didn't always do, and which told him something about how long this had been going on. Then she held him at arm's length and looked at him with the assessing quality she applied to things she was forming an opinion about. "You look like you've been outside for 2 weeks," she said. "I have been outside for 2 weeks," Harry said. "Good. I have a great deal to show you." Ron had not come. His parents had decided he should stay at the Burrow, Hermione explained, with the careful neutrality of someone who had thought hard about being fair to all parties, fair to Mr. and Mrs. Butt, Weasley for making a reasonable parental decision, and fair to Ron, who had been very vocal about his feelings on the subject and was, as of Hermione leaving, still being vocal. "How angry?" Harry asked. "He wrote the word unfair 12 times on 1 page, Hermione said. "I counted. She had been working." She laid it all out that afternoon. Harry, Charlie, Arthur, and Hermione gathered around the long table in the records room, with the windows open onto the valley, and the specific stillness of a space where something was about to be said that changed things. Hermione had organized her pages with her usual precision, but her voice when she started had a different quality than usual, the particular carefulness she used when she had arrived at a conclusion she knew was going to be uncomfortable to deliver. "I've been looking at a pattern," she said. "Across every case I could locate of a dragon warding circle being invoked, the sanctuary's own records, the footnote in that interspecies protocol survey, 2 references from ICW historical minutes that Charlie sent me, and 6 older accounts from European dragon-keeping communities in the Hogwarts Library's translation collection." She arranged several pages in front of her with the edge of the table. "The cases are rare. Across 5 centuries of dragon-keeping records, there are perhaps 12 documented instances, most of them fragmentary. But they have one thing in common." She looked up. Every wizard claimed by a dragon-warding circle had at some point before the bond was invoked survived a magical encounter that should have killed them. Not dangerous magic, not an accident or a misaimed curse, something categorical, something where the full force of a magical event passed through them completely, and they survived it anyway. The 1952nd case in the sanctuary's own records, Hermione went on. The unnamed wizard. There is a separate footnote indicating he had survived an encounter with a cursed object of unknown origin. The footnote doesn't draw an explicit connection. It just notes it. "My theory," she said carefully, "is that surviving that kind of encounter leaves a specific quality in a person's magical signature, something dragons can perceive that other magical beings apparently cannot or don't. I don't know what that quality is exactly. I haven't found a source that names it, but I don't think the dragons are choosing arbitrarily. I think they're responding to something they recognize." The room was quiet. "My scar," Harry said. It came out flat, not quite a question. "The night Voldemort's killing curse rebounded," Hermione said. "The full force of it passed through you, and you survived. How that happened, nobody knows that. But whatever trace that event left in your magical signature, however dragons perceive such things, I believe that is what they are responding to." Harry looked at the table. He thought about the shape of what she'd just said. If she was right, and the specific misery of Hermione's conclusions was that they were usually right, then the reason the dragons had claimed him was the same event that had killed his parents. The same night, the same spell, the same 31 seconds of October 1981 that had given him the scar and the nightmares and the parseltongue and the particular weight of being a person whose survival had cost something enormous. He had been able for 4 years to carry this at a workable distance. He had been able to not look at it directly. Right? Harry said. He pushed his chair back and stood up. Sorry. I need a minute. He went outside. Nobody followed him, which was the correct response. He walked to the far end of the nesting ground fence and stood there. The horntail was visible through the fence, arranging her eggs with the single-minded focus she gave to anything she had decided mattered. Harry stood and watched her, and thought about what it meant to be extraordinary for this specific reason, not because of anything he'd chosen, not because of anything he'd done, but because of a night he could not remember, and a loss he had been living inside of since before he could talk. He didn't arrive at a conclusion. He stood until the feeling had somewhere to go. Then he stood a little longer. Charlie found him in the nesting grounds later that evening, sitting beside the Romanian longhorn. Charlie came through the gate, looked at the longhorn and at Harry, and sat down on the rock without asking how he was. Tea. He had the quality of someone who had spent time thinking carefully about what to say, and had decided to say very little of it. They were quiet for a while. 8 years, Charlie said eventually. I've been here 8 years. I had a Quidditch career, more or less if I'd wanted it. People told me I had England if I wanted it. That was the direction everything was pointing. That was the easier path. He looked out at the valley where the last of the light was leaving the ridge. I chose this instead, not because staying was obviously the right thing. I didn't know that at 20. I just chose it. He paused. I'm not going to tell you that staying is the right thing for you. I can't know that. I'm not you, and I don't know enough yet. But there is one thing I know, from watching for 2.5 weeks. He looked at Harry. The dragons are not your enemy. Harry thought about the boundary test, Arthur 3 meters away, and the invisible line that would not move. He thought about the longhorn lowering its head in the dark. He thought about the horntail turning away without aggression, classifying him as something she already understood. I know, he said. And then, because saying it out loud made it a different kind of real. I know that. Charlie nodded once. They sat with the longhorn until the valley had gone fully dark, and then went inside. The ICW letter arrived the next morning. The review had been formally convened. That was confirmed. But the review required an expert. Specifically, a magiciologist who specialized in dragon interspecies protocols. Locating an appropriate expert was underway. This would take additional weeks, potentially extending into the following month. Harry read the letter, handed it back to Charlie, and went to watch the morning feeding. He had, somewhere around the 12th day, stopped having strong feelings about letters. The news from Britain arrived during dinner. Arthur received it by owl while they were still at the table. He stood at the window to read it, and when he turned back, his face had the particular quality of a man choosing carefully how much of what he was thinking to put on it. The Quidditch World Cup has finished, he said. Ireland won. Charlie looked at him with the stillness that meant he was waiting. And there was an incident at the campsite afterward, Arthur said. He spoke quietly, as though keeping the volume down made the information smaller. Some people with old allegiances to a cause that most people have been hoping to believe is finished. No one was killed. It's being managed. Harry looked at him. He knew what old allegiances to a cause meant. There was only one war in living memory, and only one kind of person who might carry its allegiances into a Quidditch campsite. Dumbledore had said things to him at the sanctuary boundary about Harry's proximity to what was still coming, about things he needed to learn. Those words had a sharper shape now in the light of Arthur's careful face and the things Arthur was choosing not to say. All right, Harry said. Arthur said nothing else about it. They finished dinner in a quiet that held more inside it than it showed. Newton Scamander arrived on a Wednesday morning in the second half of August, carrying only a worn leather case. He sat down at the sanctuary gate with the particular care of someone transporting something more interesting than documents. He was very old, not as a number, though the number was considerable, but as a quality of movement, the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had been navigating the world carefully for a very long time and had stopped expecting it to accommodate his pace. He went directly to the dragons without speaking to anyone first, which Charlie explained was method, not rudeness. Scamander had been attending to magical creatures since before most of the people in the sanctuary were born, and he had his own order of operations. The dragons watched him with the specific attention Harry had come to think of as their form of respect. He spent 2 full days examining the warding circle, the founding records, the ICW charter provisions Charlie had compiled, and the dragons themselves, to whom he spoke in a low, deliberate manner that was not Parseltongue, and not any language Harry could identify, and which the dragons listened to in ways they did not listen to most people. On the 3rd morning he sat down with Harry, Charlie, and the senior keeper in the records room. "The bond is genuine," Newton Scamander said. He had a quiet, careful voice, the voice of a man who had spent a very long career attending to things most wizards walked past without noticing. "I have examined 3 documented cases in the course of my work. This is a 4th, and it matches the pattern in every characteristic. The last recorded instance in written record is from the 16th century, a keeper in what is now Eastern Poland, unnamed in the surviving documents." He looked at Harry directly. The Warlocks Convention of 1709 makes no provision for this bond. The convention regulated dragon breeding. The Kinbond Protocol predates it by centuries, and the ICW founding charter predates the convention further still. No authority created after the Bond Protocol can override it retroactively. This is what the Headmaster's seal encountered when it arrived here, and the Ministry Directive. "What resolves it?" Harry asked. "Voluntary acknowledgement, from both parties. No hesitation. The wizard must choose to accept the bond's terms. The dragons must agree to those terms in return." In every recorded case, resolution came this way. There is no recorded case of a kin bond ending through external force. I have looked carefully, and it does not exist. "So I have to choose to accept it," Harry said. "And the dragons have to agree to terms." "Yes. When a voluntary acknowledgement is made, the warding circle opens. The bond's conditions would still apply, and those conditions would need to be negotiated before any acknowledgement is given. But the physical containment releases." Harry looked at Charlie. Charlie looked back at him with the steady, non-pushing quality he had maintained throughout all of this, and said nothing. Dumbledore arrived the following afternoon. He came through the visitor entrance alone. No McGonagall, no ministry escort, nothing preceding him. Deep blue robes, silver hair and beard loose to his chest, and he was carrying nothing at all. He was very tall and older-looking than Harry had ever registered him being at Hogwarts. The age was different in Romanian afternoon light. In a place that had nothing to do with the institution Dumbledore headed. He spoke with the sanctuary's administrator first, courteous and efficient, and disposed of administrative formalities in under 10 minutes. Then he walked across the yard to where Harry was standing. He looked at Harry for a moment before speaking, something more personal than an assessment. "You look well," Dumbledore said. "Charlie feeds everyone," Harry said, a brief, genuine smile. "He has his mother's instincts in that regard." Then, quietly, "I am glad you are well." Harry had seen Dumbledore dozens of times at Hogwarts without ever quite registering what 113 years looked like on a person. The age was different here. visible in a way it wasn't at Hogwarts, and the fact that he had come himself, from Scotland to Romania, in person, alone, carrying nothing, told Harry something that all the letters and all the formal procedures had not. They walked to the low wall at the far end of the nesting grounds, where the valley lay below them, and the conversation was their own. Dumbledore set aside, by silent agreement, all of the institutional mechanisms that had been deployed over the past weeks. "You know why I came," he said. "I think so," Harry said. "Then I will say it plainly, which I have not done often enough." Dumbledore looked out at the valley. "Lord Voldemort is not destroyed. He was diminished in 1981, but not permanently. What happened at the Quidditch World Cup campsite was not a coincidence. He is working his way back, and the process is further along than most people in positions of authority are willing to acknowledge." He paused. "There are things you need to learn that can only be learned at Hogwarts. Things about yourself and about what connects you to Voldemort that I have been preparing the ground to tell you. The sanctuary is extraordinary, Harry, but it cannot give you what you need. You've known about the connection between me and Voldemort for years," Harry said. "I have known some of it for years. I am still learning the rest, and there is more. You haven't told me." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "There is." Harry looked out at the valley. Behind him, the Romanian Longhorn was somewhere in the nesting grounds, present in his awareness the way it was always present now, steady and directional like a compass. He thought about 3 weeks of having nothing to do but be where he was. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If Voldemort is coming back, and I am the one who has to face him, whatever that means, then why have you spent my entire life making decisions about it without telling me?" He said it quietly. Anger would have been easier. This was more specific. "My parents' house, Privet Drive, Hogwarts, the things you know and haven't said. I understand reasons exist. I'm asking why the decisions were always yours and not mine." Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. The evening sounds of the sanctuary rose from below, wing beats, low calls, the particular resonance of the enclosures settling into dark. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that telling you everything would place a weight on you before you could bear it. Afraid that the full shape of what you might face would damage something I could not repair." He looked at Harry steadily. "I am not certain the fear was wrong, but I am certain it was not my decision to make alone, and I made it alone anyway. That I cannot justify to you." Harry thought about Arthur 3 meters away at the gate. He thought about Charlie in the nesting grounds. "Not going to tell you that staying is the right thing." "All right," he said. "Not, it is resolved. Not, I forgive you, just, I have heard it. This is the beginning of something." Dumbledore appeared to understand the distinction. Harry did not hear most of the conversation between Dumbledore and Charlie. He saw it from across the yard, Charlie with his arms crossed in the way he had when he was listening to something he intended to answer thoughtfully. Dumbledore with his hands clasped behind his back. He saw Charlie speak. He saw Dumbledore go still. Charlie told him afterward. He'd said that he thought Dumbledore might consider the fact that the sanctuary had kept Harry safer in 3 weeks than wherever Harry had been before. Dumbledore had stood in the Romanian evening and not answered for a long time, and then had said something quiet that Charlie didn't report. Dumbledore left at dusk. He walked back through the visitor entrance, alone, and paused once at the gate to look back at the sanctuary, at the enclosures, at the last of the light on the ridge, at the place that had held Harry for nearly 4 weeks against every formal mechanism that had tried to reach it. Then he went through the gate. Nothing about the legal situation had changed. The bond was still in place. The warding circle would still form, if Harry walked toward the gate. The ICW review was still ongoing, but there was something between him and Dumbledore now that hadn't been there before this afternoon. Not trust, exactly, and not understanding, but the beginning of the conditions for both, thin and new and requiring care on both sides. Harry went to find Charlie, and they made dinner, and the Longhorn called from the valley, and the evening was just an evening. Charlie went to the warding circle alone the following morning, before the keepers had started the first feeding, and while the valley was still in the particular blue light that preceded the Romanian sunrise. He had spent the day before thinking about it, sitting in the kitchen after Harry had gone to bed, working through what he understood about the situation and what he intended to say, with the focused quiet he brought to things that required him to get them right. He was not going to speak to the dragons the way a keeper spoke to charges, with authority, with command, with the expectation of a specific kind of obedience. He had understood for some time now that this was not that kind of relationship and never had been. He was going to ask them a question, the way you asked a question when you lived in a place and the place had its own claim on you. Arthur was watching from the far corner of the yard. He had positioned himself at a respectful distance, close enough to see, far enough to make clear he was not part of the conversation. He had spent 5 days at the sanctuary now, and he had learned when to step back and let Charlie work. The warding circle formed as Charlie approached, the dragons taking up their positions with the unhurried certainty Harry had described since the first day. Charlie stood at the edge of it and waited for them to settle. Then he spoke, quietly, steadily, as though he had all the time available and intended to use it carefully. He named what he understood, the bond, the terms as Newton Scamander had described them, what Harry had tried, and what Harry had been willing to do, and why the current situation helped no one who was party to it. He was presenting what he knew and asking whether there was a way forward that the dragons could accept. He stood and waited for a long time after he had finished speaking. The chief Romanian Longhorn moved first. It stepped back from its position in the warding circle, not breaking the formation, but creating a gap in it. The others held their positions. Charlie came to find Harry and Hermione afterward, and Newton Scamander and the senior keeper, and they gathered in the records room one more time. "The circle has a gap in it," Charlie said. "Scamander, and I think we know what it means." He looked at Harry. "They're offering terms. The terms, as Charlie and Scamander interpreted them through the founding records and Scamander's own experience, Harry could leave the sanctuary boundary during term time. He would be free to attend Hogwarts, to travel, to live the ordinary course of a school year without physical constraint. But during school holidays, he would return to the sanctuary, to Romania. The bond would not be dissolved. It would remain in effect for his lifetime. In exchange for his acknowledgement of it, the containment would lift. Charlie presented all of this to Harry in the plain, unhurried way he presented most things, and then stopped talking. "Those are the options," Harry said after a moment. "Either keep fighting it, which Scamander says won't work, or agree to spend every holiday in Romania for the rest of my life." "That's what we're reading from the gap in the circle," Charlie said. "Yes." Harry was quiet. He looked at the table, and then at the window, then at the table again. Outside, the valley was fully in morning light now, the enclosures visible through the glass, the dragons moving through their routines. "What does it mean for Hogwarts? Term time, you're free. The holidays are here. Christmas, yes. Easter, yes. The whole of next summer, yes," Charlie said. He did not soften it. Harry had not asked him to. Harry was quiet for a long time after that. "Can I ask you something?" he said eventually. "Of course. Would you have chosen this? If it had happened to you? Charlie sat with the question. He did not answer it immediately, which was why Harry had asked him specifically. Charlie was not in the business of answering questions before he had thought about them. I don't know, Charlie said finally. I don't know what I would have done if someone had told me at 14 that I was going to spend every school holiday in Romania for the foreseeable future, with no say in it. He paused. But I chose the dragons anyway in the end. I chose to come back and to stay, and I choose it again. He looked at Harry. Those are different questions. I can only answer the one I actually know the answer to. Harry looked out the window for a long moment. I want to do it today, he said. I don't want to wait. The dragons were still in their positions when they came out into the yard. The gap in the circle was still there. Not an invitation exactly, but a space that had been made available, and a space Harry intended to use. Charlie walked beside him to the edge of the circle. I'll come in with you, he said. I know, Harry said. They stepped between two of the outer dragons. The dragons acknowledged Charlie's passage with the easy recognition they always gave him, and Harry's with the weighted, present awareness Harry had come to understand was not menace but something more than it. They walked to the center of the circle where the chief Romanian Longhorn was waiting with the stillness of something that had been waiting patiently for several weeks and was content to wait a little longer. He did not speak Parseltongue. There was no language here that Parseltongue reached. He knew that from the first morning. And he did not try. He had no words the Longhorn shared. What he had was the decision he had made this morning, and his presence in the center of the warding circle. And the fact that he was not trying to leave the Longhorn looked at him. Harry looked back. The dragons closed the circle. Completely. All the gaps, including the one that had been the gap of the counteroffer, the edges of the circle coming together until it was whole and sealed, and Harry was at the center of it with Charlie beside him. He felt the familiar pressure of the boundary, but not at the gate around him now, enclosing present on every side. Then the circle opened, all of it. The dragons stepped back from their positions in the formation, and the space around Harry expanded, and the gate behind him stood open, and there was nothing between him and the road outside, except the distance he chose to walk. Harry stood at the center of where the warding circle had been and breathed. He could leave. He could walk out right now, down the road, all the way to the British border, if he could get a port key, and nothing would stop him. That was the point. He wasn't leaving yet. He had things to do, and he wanted to do them right, and Hermione was already writing, but he could. Hermione had indeed been writing since before the circle opened. She was outside the circle with her parchment and a quill, making notes in the precise shorthand she used when she was working quickly and didn't want to lose anything. Within an hour, she had produced 4 pages of framework, how the terms of the bond could be registered formally with the ICW, what documentation would establish the conditions as a mutual agreement rather than a continuing captivity, what protections that registration would give Harry if anyone tried to interfere with his holiday returns. She presented it to Newton's commander with the focused urgency of someone who had been waiting weeks for the moment to do useful work, and he read through it carefully. Harry signed his name to the draft registration document that evening. The following morning, he walked to the outer gate. The gate stood open, had stood open since the day before, and Harry had crossed it twice already on sanctuary business, without the old pressure meeting him at the boundary. He walked through it again now, in the early light, out onto the road that ran along the base of the ridge. Charlie came through behind him, and they stood on the road outside the sanctuary boundary, which was the first time in 3 weeks and 3 days Harry had stood on this particular ground. He didn't say anything. Charlie didn't say anything either. The air was the same air on both sides, and the valley was the same valley, and the sound of the dragons came over the wall from the enclosures in the ordinary way. After a while, Harry turned around and looked back through the gate. The Romanian longhorn was inside the grounds, a distance from the gate, visible in the morning light. It was watching him with the specific, weighted quality that Harry understood. Now was simply attention, not threat, not claim, though both of those things were also true, just attention. The acknowledgement of something it considered known. Harry raised a hand. He didn't know why. He just did. The longhorn looked at him for another moment, and then looked away and went back to whatever it had been doing, which was what it always did. The portkey brought him to the burrow on a Thursday afternoon in the last week of August, the kind of day that still had summer in it, but was starting to remember that autumn existed. He landed in the garden the way he always landed, one hand in the dirt, the other reaching for something that wasn't there, and looked up at the house. It looked exactly as it always looked, implausibly tall, impossibly inhabited, held upright by some combination of structural magic and decades of accumulated intention. A gnome waddled through the vegetable beds with the offended dignity of an animal that had been degnomed recently and hadn't forgiven the experience. Molly Weasley came out of the back door before Harry had stood all the way up. She crossed the garden quickly and hugged him the way she hugged people, completely without reserve, with both arms and all of her attention, and held on for longer than a normal greeting. Harry's hands were dirty from the landing, but she either didn't notice or didn't mind, and he was briefly aware that his eyes were doing something embarrassing. So he waited until she let go, and then looked at the gnome until it passed. "You're too thin," she said. "Come inside." He was not too thin. Charlie's kitchen had been consistent and thorough, but this was Molly's opening position on any arrival, and he followed her inside without argument. The kitchen smelled of rosemary, and something baking warm in the specific way. Weasley kitchens were warm, with a particular quality of a room that had been feeding people for a long time. Fred and George were audible upstairs in the way that suggested an ongoing project. The clock on the wall had all its hands pointing at home. The table was set for more people than were currently in the room, because Molly set the table for more people than were in the room even when she knew exactly how many people were coming. Harry sat down. Molly put tea in front of him. She did not ask about Romania. Ron came in from the direction of the back garden 5 minutes later, with the specific expression of someone who had prepared in advance for how they were going to handle seeing Harry again, and had then come around the corner and seen Harry sitting at the kitchen table, and immediately forgotten. "Oh," Ron said. "Hi," Harry said. There was a pause. Ron sat across the table from him. His ears were going red, which happened when he was managing several feelings at once, and hadn't sorted out which one to lead with. "You know," Ron said, "I missed the Quidditch World Cup. I know. My parents kept me at the burrow all summer. In case you came back, I know. I'm sorry." "I'm not saying it's your fault," Ron said carefully, with the emphasis of someone who had been rehearsing this. "I'm just saying that it happened."
"I know,"
Harry said again.
"Island won,"
Ron said. Ron looked at him for a moment, then he deflated slightly, in the specific way Ron deflated when he'd been prepared to be angry for longer than the situation could sustain. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yeah," Harry said. A pause. "So you have to go back," Ron said, "to Romania for Christmas." "Yeah." Ron absorbed this. Then, with the straightforward decisiveness that Harry had always considered one of his best qualities. "Right. Well, I'm coming." Harry laughed, something that came out more like a breath, but the right kind. Arthur found him that evening after dinner, when Molly had sent Fred and George to work on the garden, and Ron and Ginny were somewhere upstairs. He sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and spoke in the quiet, considered way he had when the thing he was saying deserved care. The World Cup aftermath was worse than what Arthur had told him at the sanctuary. Not dramatically worse, the facts were the same ones. The dark mark over the campsite, the riot, the Death Eaters in the crowd. But at the sanctuary, with a closed window and careful phrasing, Arthur had given Harry the facts. Now he gave him the shape. What the dark mark appearing had meant to people who remembered the First War, how quickly the riot had turned. How many people who'd been in the crowd had understood immediately what they were seeing, and what understanding it had cost them. Harry listened without interrupting. He didn't feel afraid, exactly. He felt the thing Dumbledore had set going in him at the sanctuary. Not a warning, more like an awareness, like a clock being started that he hadn't known was there before. The sense of something counting and the count moving in a specific direction. "Thank you for telling me," he said. Arthur looked at him with the particular quiet attention he used when he wanted to understand something without pressing it. "You've changed a bit," he said. "Romania did something." Harry wasn't sure what to say to that. He thought it was true. He didn't argue. September the 1st arrived in the ordinary way. The Hogwarts Express, the long journey north, Ron across from him, and Hermione beside him with her notes, the landscape moving from midlands to moorland through the windows. Harry sat with his face turned toward the glass and thought about very little. He was aware, faintly, of the east, the direction of the Carpathian Ridge, in a way he had not been before Romania. Not uncomfortable, just there, a known location registering itself at the edge of his awareness. The welcome feast was the welcome feast. Enchanted ceiling showing early autumn cloud and stars, first years wide-eyed from the boat crossing, the hall full of sound and candlelight and the specific warm chaos of 4 houses in one room. Dumbledore rose to speak, and when his eyes moved over the Gryffindor table and found Harry, they paused. It was very brief, a registration, a flicker of something, acknowledged no performance in it, no careful headmasterly neutrality, just the particular way two people look at each other when something has changed between them and both of them know it. Harry looked back and then looked away, and the feast went on, and Dumbledore announced the Triwizard Tournament, and the hall erupted in the sound of several hundred people discovering something unexpected. Harry sat in the noise and thought about the warding circle opening. He thought about standing on the road and turning back. He thought about a hand raised for no particular reason at a dragon that had already looked away. He thought that he had made choices before, without ever feeling quite like he had chosen, and that 3 weeks in Romania had given him some sense of what the difference felt like. He did not tell anyone about the East. The first morning he woke at Hogwarts, it was simply there, a direction, a compass point, like knowing where the owlery was without thinking about it, the sanctuary. East, across the North Sea, across the continent, across the foothills and into the valley that smelled of sulphur and cedar. Not a pain, not a pull. Just a thing that was true, the way Hedwig was true and Ron was true and Hogwarts itself was true, a part of the landscape of his life that had not been there 3 months ago. Hagrid found him on the grounds that evening, in the last light before the September dark. They fell into walking together along the edge of the lake in the way they had fallen into walking together in other years without particular direction or hurry. "All right, Harry," Hagrid said. "Yeah," Harry said. "Good." Hagrid looked at him with the expression he had when he intended to accept an answer without pressing it. Heard Charlie's lot took good care of you out there." "They did," Harry said. Hagrid nodded. It was a satisfied nod. The nod of someone whose confidence in something had been confirmed, not extended. "Knew they would," he said. "Charlie's good people. His lot out there are all good people." They walked a little further in the settling dark. Harry put his hands in his pockets and breathed the particular Scottish autumn air, different from the sulphur and cedar air of Romania, and not a replacement for it, and that was fine. Both were true. He was beginning to understand that he could hold more than one true thing. The Goblet of Fire produced a fourth piece of parchment on a Thursday evening in October, and the Great Hall went quiet in the specific way that large rooms go quiet when something unexpected has happened and nobody is certain yet how to respond. Harry heard his name in Dumbledore's voice. He sat still for a moment. Then Ron nudged him from the left, and Harry stood up and walked to the front of the Great Hall through 400 people's collective attention, and not all of that attention was friendly, because everyone had just watched 3 schools draw 1 champion each, and now there was a 4th, and the 4th was Hogwarts again. He walked toward the door at the back of the Great Hall and thought, "Here we go again. Not disbelief, or not only disbelief. Something quieter than that." He had spent 3.5 weeks unable to leave a dragon sanctuary, returned to school with a compass bearing east, hardwired into his awareness, and now had been entered into a tournament he hadn't entered. He was not surprised in the way a person is surprised when something genuinely unprecedented happens. The champions' room was warm and lit by firelight. The 3 other champions were already there, the Hogwarts champion from Hufflepuff, the Beaux Batons champion, the Durmstrang champion. They all turned to look at Harry when he entered, with expressions that ran the range from curious to irritated. Dumbledore came in with the tournament officials and a ministry representative, and the conversation that followed was structured like an argument but concluded like a verdict. Harry must have entered his name. Harry insisted he had not. The officials confirmed that the goblet's selection constituted a binding magical contract. And in the end, the conclusion was that Harry would compete whether he wished to or not. Dumbledore asked Harry once in the corridor afterward, "You did not enter your name." "No," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, with the careful attention Harry had come to recognize. Since Romania, the attention that took something seriously, rather than managing it. "All right," he said quietly. "Then I will look into it." Hermione was waiting for him in the Gryffindor common room, with 2 books open, and the expression of someone who had already been thinking for several hours. "A binding magical contract," she said the following morning at breakfast, not for the first time, with 3 more books in front of her and quill in hand. "The goblet creates a binding magical contract. That's what they keep saying." "Yes," Harry said. "And your bond with the sanctuary is registered with the ICW as a formal mutual agreement." "Yes, which is also a kind of contract." Harry set down his fork. Ron had stopped eating toast and was watching Hermione with the expression he used when he was waiting to find out where this was going. "The first task involves dragons," Hermione said, with the careful precision she used when delivering something she'd thought through and wasn't quite certain of yet. "Under the terms of your bond, the ICW registered terms. What does it mean for you to compete in a task that requires taking an object from a nesting dragon? I'm not saying it prohibits it. I'm asking whether anyone has thought to ask the question." Ron stopped chewing. "Write it up," Harry said. She already had. The inquiry reached the tournament officials by way of Professor McGonagall's office that afternoon. 3 pages of closely argued parchment, citing the ICW registration document by date and case number. The formal question, did Harry's status as Dragonkin, acknowledged under the ICW founding charter? create a procedural conflict with a tournament task that required him to interact with a nesting dragon in a competitive context. Dumbledore's response came within 48 hours. It acknowledged the conflict formally. It noted that the ICW would need to issue a procedural ruling before the first task date. It committed to no specific position beyond those two things, and it did not, Harry noticed, say the first task's date would be moved. He was struck, reading it, by the particular position Dumbledore was in. He had spent several weeks deploying the ICW's authority in an effort to retrieve Harry from the sanctuary, writing as supreme mugwump, invoking international treaty law. Now the same international framework was being invoked on Harry's behalf, and Dumbledore was on the receiving end of it. He had responded with characteristic fairness. Harry held that thought. "He doesn't have much choice," Ron said. "He's being fair about it," Hermione said. "He doesn't." Ron, that was the end of that. The ICW's procedural question was still unresolved when Charlie's owl arrived. It came on a Tuesday evening, 2.5 weeks after the Goblet's announcement. Harry had not heard from Charlie since September. He recognized the owl, a brown bird from the sanctuary's own working flock, larger than Hedwig, with an officious bearing and a slight contempt for interior spaces. It landed on Harry's arm at dinner and helped itself to a bread roll. The letter was short. "I've heard about the tournament. I don't have advice for you about it. You know more than I do about the legal situation, and Hermione knows more than either of us. But there's one thing you should have. The horntail they're sending for your first task is one of ours. We've been working with her since she was a hatchling." Charlie had written a working name for the dragon in the sanctuary's own shorthand, half Romanian, half the compressed notation the keepers used among themselves. He gave it without explanation. Harry read the letter twice. Charlie had not told him what to do with the name, had not offered strategy, had not predicted what difference it would make, had simply sent it, the way you sent someone the truth about something when you thought they deserved to have it before they needed it. Harry took out parchment and wrote one line. "Does she know me?" Charlie's reply came 3 days later, shorter than the first letter. "Yes." Harry put both letters in his trunk. The ICW ruling arrived on a Monday. The language was the careful, fully qualified language that ICW documents always used. But the conclusion was clear. Harry's status as Dragonkin did not prohibit his competing in the Triwizard Tournament. The bonds, terms, and acknowledgements applied specifically to his relationship with the dragons of the Romanian sanctuary, the dragons who had invoked the claim, and not to dragons as a general category. His competing in a task that involved a different dragon, in a different context, fell outside the bond's scope as registered. Hermione read it 3 times and made annotations in the margins. "The wording matters," she said. "They're not saying the bond is limited in its terms. They're saying it applies to a specific group of dragons, not to dragons universally." She looked up. "That's good for you. Long term?" Harry nodded. He had read it once, understood the verdict, and set it down. The legal question was resolved. The first task was not. Ron looked at him across the table. "The dragon does, knowing her name. Does it change anything?" Harry thought about the 3 weeks in the sanctuary. He thought about the morning he had walked out through the gate and turned around without deciding to. He thought about what it was to know something about a dragon before the moment arrived. Not a strategy, not an advantage in any practical sense, just a name, which was what you had when you knew something was real and not just a thing that was about to happen to you. "Maybe," he said. "I don't know yet. He would find out in 2 weeks." The first task was scheduled. The date had not moved. The 4 champions would compete. Harry would go to it knowing one thing that the other 3 did not. The dragon he faced had a name, and Charlie had given it to him, and that was not nothing. It was not nothing at all. The night before the task, Harry lay in his sleeping bag in the champion's tent and thought about the warding circle. Not strategy. He had done the strategy, had done it methodically over the preceding 2 weeks while Ron and Hermione argued the best approach, and Harry listened and agreed with their conclusions. He was afraid in all the ordinary ways, the particular quality of attention the body gives to the hours before something dangerous. Too much blood in his ears. That part was the same as it would have been in any version of his life. What he was doing now, lying awake with canvas overhead and cold air coming in at the tent flaps, was something else. He was thinking about standing in the center of the warding circle. He had not spoken. He had simply stopped fighting, had stopped trying to leave, had been present without trying to be elsewhere. And the dragons had looked at him for a while, and then the circle had opened. He had not done anything except stop doing the wrong thing. He knew the Horntail's name. Charlie had sent it. Charlie did not do things without a reason. Harry had been learning since July to trust what Charlie knew about dragons. He turned the name over in his mind in the dark. It was not a spell or a strategy. It was what the keepers called her every day, which meant it was what she recognized among all the sounds humans made in her vicinity. He had no language the dragons shared. He had known that since the first morning in July when Parseltongue had slid off them without catching. But a name was something. He slept badly and woke before the other champions. He ate nothing. When his name was called, he walked out into the arena. The Horntail was larger than he'd measured her in memory. Dragons were always larger in person than memory retained. Something about their physical presence exceeded what the mind filed. She was on her nest, at the far end of the arena, black-scaled, bronze-spiked, with the attentiveness of a creature that had been tracking his approach since he entered. He summoned his broom. He had considered other approaches, had turned over, in the preceding days, what the months at the sanctuary had taught him. He thought about what Charlie had said, that you did not go to dragons as if commanding charges. He thought about the longhorn lowering its head in the dark. He had thought about all of this and arrived sensibly at broom. But he went to get the golden egg the way he had crossed the sanctuary yard in August, not as if the dragon were an obstacle to be outmaneuvered, but as himself, in the same space as the dragon, with the full knowledge of what she was. He went high first, drawing her attention upward the way the sanctuary's senior keeper had once explained that dragons tracked movement, not like birds which followed the fastest thing, but like creatures that classified everything in their field of awareness by whether it was a threat or not a threat, and responded accordingly. Harry was not trying to confuse her. He was trying to be something other than a threat, which was not the same as being fast or being clever. It was something closer to being known. He came in low and fast from the left side, and the Horntail turned her full attention on him and pulled back to charge, and then she paused. A breath's worth, the interval where something recognizes an element of a situation that does not quite match its expectations. Harry did not pause. He swept in, grabbed the golden egg, and pulled away as the Horntail's tail came around. Nobody in the stands would have seen it. It was too brief, he was moving too fast, and the crowd's attention was on the egg and the broom and the scores. Harry had noticed it. He had been waiting for it without quite knowing. He had been waiting. He came down outside the arena with the golden egg in his hands and sat on the landing ground for a moment breathing. He was not hurt. The scores were good. He could tell from the sound. He did not particularly care about the scores. Charlie was among the handlers when the Horntail was returned to her transport. Harry saw him across the holding area in his keeper's gear, talking to the Horntail in the low, steady voice he used with all the dragons, directing the other handlers with the particular calm of someone in the right place doing the right thing. He looked up, found Harry. He nodded. Harry nodded. Hermione was 20 meters away, crying from relief. Ron was shouting Harry's name at a volume that suggested he'd been holding it in for the duration of the task. Charlie turned back to his work, and the Horntail was loaded into her transport, and that was the first task. December arrived the way it always did, the castle growing colder, the common room fires growing larger, the days shortening into dark. Harry's trunk was packed, the morning term ended. Ron's had been packed for 3 days. They arrived at the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary on the afternoon of the 23rd via Portkey, with their bags, and the particular disorientation of international magical travel. Harry landed in the dirt as he always did. Ron landed upright, and then stood in the yard and looked at the enclosures and the ridge and the winter sky, and said nothing for a moment. "It's bigger than I thought," he said. "Yes," Harry said. "And the smell." A sound rose from the nearest enclosure. The low, resonant call the keepers called a check the sound dragons made when something had changed in the near environment. Harry had learned all the calls in August without intending to. He knew what that one meant. Ron moved half a step closer to him without appearing to notice. Charlie came out of the administration building and crossed the yard with the same unhurried certainty he crossed every space in, shook Ron's hand with the warmth of someone who had been thinking well of him since he'd kept his word about coming, and brought them inside and put the kettle on and explained where everything was. The dragon's acknowledgement of Harry's return came that evening. Charlie took Harry to the nesting grounds, and the Romanian longhorn turned its head when Harry came through the gate, the dense present attention Harry had learned to read as recognition. It looked at him for a moment. Then it went back to whatever it had been doing. Ron had come as far as the gate. He had been admirably composed about the whole thing, had watched the younger longhorns at the afternoon feeding without flinching, had asked sensible questions about the containment wards. He had done well. Then the chief Romanian longhorn turned its full attention on him. Ron grabbed Harry's arm. "Right," he said, in a voice that was meaningfully quieter than his usual one. "It's fine," Harry said. "It's looking at me. At me, specifically, Ron." "Okay." He did not release Harry's arm for another 30 seconds. Charlie made dinner in the kitchen, the same kitchen Harry had sat in all through August, with the same smell of wood smoke and the same low sound from the valley, and the same quality of sufficiency that all Charlie's meals had, where there was always enough and it was always warm. The other keepers filtered in and out during the evening, greeting Harry with the easy acknowledgement of people who had spent a summer managing an extraordinary situation alongside him and had decided they liked him for it. Ron watched all of this with the alert, calibrating attention he used when he was somewhere new, and was deciding what he thought. He ate 2 full plates of whatever Charlie had made, and then sat back with the expression of someone quietly revising something. "I think I see why you chose them," he said. He was looking at Charlie. "The dragons, over everything else." Charlie looked at him for a moment. "Good," he said. He poured more tea. Harry went to sleep in the guest quarters that night, without any strategy or intention beyond lying down and closing his eyes, and found that for the first time since he'd left in September, the background awareness of the bond's direction was not pressing at him the way it pressed at Hogwarts. The pull he had carried through autumn, east, always east, a compass needle that never quite settled, had not disappeared. It had simply arrived. He was where it pointed. There was nothing for it to pull toward, because he was already there. He was not fighting it, and it was not asking anything of him. It just was. He slept until the dragons called at dawn, and then lay still in the dark and listened to them, and this was how his first Christmas in Romania began. The return to Hogwarts began on the train, the same way things always began. The compartment, cold January light through the windows, Ron across from him with a book he wasn't reading, the landscape moving south to north in the familiar way. Harry sat at the window and watched it go. He was aware during the journey of the east, receding behind him. Not painfully, that was the difference between January and September. In September, the awareness had pressed at him like something being pulled away. Now it simply registered its location, the way you registered where your bed was, even when you weren't in it. He knew where Romania was. He would be back at Easter. Something had changed in him over Christmas, and it wasn't happiness exactly, and it wasn't peace, which was a word that didn't account for the tournament still underway, and the second task still coming, and all the things Dumbledore had not yet told him. But there was a difference in how he was positioned relative to all of it. He was not waiting for his life to start. He had been somewhere real. He had done something and chosen something, and the choosing had been his. The future did not feel like a space he was being moved through. It had a different quality now, the quality of being. In some way he could not quite articulate his. He thought about this without naming it, and looked at Ron's unread book, and didn't say anything, and the train went north. Hermione had spent Christmas at her parents' dentist's in a Muggle suburb, where the holidays were ordinary in all the ways Harry's had not been, and she was waiting for them at King's Cross, with her bag over one shoulder and the expression of someone who had been working throughout the break and had things to report. She gave Harry the completed document on the train back to school, 2 days before term resumed. "The ICW registration is finalized," she said. "Your acknowledgement of the bond's terms, the dragon's acknowledgement in return, all of it formally on file." She set the parchment on the compartment seat between them and looked at him with the particular focus she brought to things she considered important and wanted him to fully understand. "Harry, the holiday returns are legally required now. The bond has teeth, but they're also legally protected. No one can interfere with them. Not the ministry, not anyone. The bond isn't only an obligation. It's a right." Harry picked up the document. His name was in it, and the sanctuary's formal designation, and a string of ICW procedural language that he didn't entirely follow but understood in its shape. He was bound to return to Romania, and he was protected in returning to Romania. "Thank you," he said. "It should have been done in August," she said. "I'm sorry it took this long. It's done now," he said. And then, because she looked like she might argue with this, "Hermione," he wrote to Dumbledore on a Tuesday evening in late January, in the hour after the common room had mostly emptied and only the fire was awake. He sat for a long time with blank parchment before he started, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted to say it correctly. He had a tendency to get angry partway through drafts. He wrote it 3 times. The final version was 1 page. He told Dumbledore that he knew there was more. He hadn't been told. He had known it before Romania. In the way you know something without having fully said it to yourself, he knew it more precisely now. He was not asking Dumbledore to tell him everything. He understood that some things could not be delivered before the time for them arrived, and he understood that Dumbledore was the one who knew when that was. He was asking for one thing, that when the time came, Dumbledore would tell him, because the time had come, not because something had happened that forced his hand. He was asking to be trusted with the next piece of it when Dumbledore judged it right. Not as a last resort. He signed it Harry, not Mr. Potter, not yours sincerely. Just his name. He sent it with Hedwig, who received the task with her usual grave dignity and was gone into the January dark before he turned back to the dormitory stairs. Dumbledore's reply arrived 2 days later, carried by the school's own post. It was brief, shorter than Harry had expected. "I will try to do better. I am as ever imperfect at this. In ways I am only beginning to fully see. I cannot promise everything you asked for in exactly the way you asked for it. I can promise that I heard you, and that I am trying. I know this seems insufficient. It may be, but it is honest." Below the closing there was a line in a slightly different hand, as if added after. "I'm glad you are well." Harry read it twice. He folded it and put it in the inner pocket of his robes, and went to Charms, which was his first class on Wednesdays. He was aware, during Charms, of the East. He was always aware of the East, during Charms. The classroom faced northwest. Hermione was on his right, Ron was on his left, with his left boot unlaced, and the sanctuary was east, across the North Sea and the continent and the ridge of the Carpathians. This was one of the true things about his life. He noted it, the way he noted Hedwig in the owlery and the loose floorboard 3 steps from the top of the Gryffindor staircase. It did not require a response. It was present the way familiar things are present, not demanding attention just there. He had stopped fighting it. Sometime in September, he had stopped noticing that he'd stopped fighting it sometime in December. Now it was simply part of the landscape of himself, and the landscape had room for it, and that was all. Charlie's letter arrived on a Friday morning in February, delivered by the same large brown sanctuary owl that always regarded the Gryffindor table with professional irritation. The Romanian longhorn, Charlie wrote, had been carrying something around in her mouth for 3 weeks. Not worryingly, she had the contented, settled quality she got when she had found something she considered worth keeping. The keepers had tried several times to get her to drop it without success, and had then tried waiting, which was the correct approach with a Romanian longhorn who had decided she was in possession of something. She had dropped it 2 days ago. It was Harry's shoe. From when you stood in the circle. We don't quite know what to do with it. Charlie had written, with the same lack of drama he brought to even his stranger observations. Current options, return it to you, put it in the records room alongside the founding documents, or give it back to her since she has clearly formed opinions about it. Advise. The letter went on for another 2 paragraphs. The nesting season was beginning early. One of the younger Horntails had developed an interest in the roof of the administration building that the senior keeper described as inconvenient and Charlie described as understandable. A new intake of keepers was arriving in March and would need orienting. Charlie's voice was entirely itself in every line, practical, warm, not performing any of it. The last line said, "See you at Easter." Harry read the letter twice in the way he read things he wanted to keep. He was aware, reading it, of how it sat alongside the other things, alongside Dumbledore's letter in his inner pocket, alongside Hermione's ICW document in his trunk, alongside the directional awareness that had been present since September and would be present. They were all simply true. They did not require resolution. They were the landscape. He folded the letter carefully. He went upstairs to his dormitory and opened his trunk. In the bottom of it, under his school things and his spare robes and the Quidditch gear he hadn't needed since before Christmas, there was a folded piece of cloth. James Potter's invisibility cloak, which had been his father's before it was his, and had arrived at Hogwarts in a Christmas package before Harry knew what it was or what it would eventually mean, or who had sent it. He had kept it in the same place since the first year he'd had it, at the bottom of whatever trunk he was using under everything else. He put Charlie's letter in the same place. Then he closed the trunk. Harry Potter, who had never had a home he chose, had been chosen by something at the start of a summer that was supposed to be ordinary, and had, at the end of a long 3 weeks in Romania, chosen it back. The tournament was still ongoing. Voldemort was still out there in whatever form he was taking. The things Dumbledore hadn't yet told him were still coming, and they were not going to be easy. All of that was ahead. But he had ground to stand on now. He had a trunk with 2 things in it that mattered. He had East, always East, which was not a trap. He went downstairs to find Ron.